Thanks, Chris. Can you hear my voice?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. I did some correction. Okay, thank you. With the handout on the website, this one on screen should be considered as the right version. So today I'll be talking about Javanese Object Voice as an undergoing topic construction. And I will specifically use I'm sorry. And I'm going to use the prepositional phrase to inform the new knowledge about this the Javanese object voice Javanese construction. So Pseudo-Javanese has two constructions, the actor voice and object voice. So in example one, the actor voice is indicated by a nasal prefix "ng" printed in a color attached to the verb rangkul or hug. The subject city is in the pre-verbal position, and the object ada iku or that child is in the post-verbal position. In the object voice construction of 1b, there is no voice morphology, but an initiator proclitic in green color, either first or second person, needs to be attached to the verb rangkul. And finally, the theme ada iku can take the pre-verbal position. In object voice construction, however, the theme can also stay in its base position without any change in meaning. Like in 2b, the theme DP ada iku appears after the verb hug. Therefore, in active voice construction, the initiator precedes the verb while the theme follows it. In object voice construction, the proclitic initiator is attached to the verb with the theme either in a pre-verbal or post-verbal position. Based on the behavior of the theme, which I refer to as the pivot in this paper, there are two competing hypotheses that should be considered. Hypothesis A, which is the traditional analysis, treats the pivot as a subject and the proclitic as an ergative agent, while hypothesis B analyzes the pivot as a topic and the proclitic as a subject. Therefore, in this paper, I would like to raise two questions. First, is the pivot a topic or a subject? And second, is the proclitic initiator a subject or an ergative initiator? I will argue that the pivot is a topic since it's subject to definiteness constraints. It can be a reflexive and it can be a prepositional phrase. These three characteristics will not be found in a subject. Secondly, I will argue that the proclitic is a subject. The main argument for this is that the proclitic can be an internal argument. In addition, since the pivot is in topic position, we may expect that Pseudo-Javanese has a subject position available for the proclitic. In this paper, the main discussion will begin with the evidence for the fronted theme as a topic, which are the binding relation facts, the definiteness constraints in topic, and most importantly, the topic's ability to take prepositional phrases. Next, I will discuss unaccusatives and psychological verb constructions to argue that the proclitic can be an internal argument and hence is possible to be a subject. After that, I will briefly talk about the implication that Javanese object voice can be a mirror of Philippine type non-actor voices, and this paper will end with a conclusion. In Pseudo-Javanese, the reflexive is expressed by the word dewe, which means self, that accompanies a certain word carrying the person information, the body person word. For the first person reflexive or myself, we have awakku dewe as in 3 and 4a, which literally means my body self. For the second person reflexive or yourself, we have awakmu dewe as in 4b, which means your body self. Cross-linguistically, a reflexive pronoun cannot be a subject. Therefore, the actor voice construction in example 3 is ungrammatical because the position before the verb senang or like is a subject position. So the reflexive pronoun awakku dewe or myself doesn't have any antecedent. On the contrary, a reflexive pronoun may take the preverbal position in object voice construction as awakku dewe or myself in 4a, which precedes the verb senang or like, and awakmu dewe or yourself in 4b, which appears before the verb benci or hate. The reflexive themes are able to occupy the pre-proclitic verbal position because a topic is an A-bar element. Therefore, its binding relation should be interpreted in its theta position. Since the reflexive is an internal argument, the initiator proclitic can serve as an antecedent. Accordingly, the theme in Javanese object voice construction behaves more like a topic rather than a subject. The second argument for the pivot as a topic is the definiteness constraint. In object voice construction, the pivot has to be definite. So in example 5a and b, the sentences are only grammatical when the object pivot tas, that means bag, and omah, that means houses, have the definite marker a. This definiteness constraint doesn't apply for the object in active voice constructions. Therefore, in example 6 and b, the object tas or bag and tahu, that means tofu, can have a definite marker or not. And then in active voice constructions, the definiteness constraint applies to the subjects. This is similar to the pivots in object voice constructions. The preverbal argument wong or man in 7a, which is a transitive sentence, has to have a definite marker like the demonstrative iku or that. Otherwise, it will be ungrammatical. Likewise, wong in 7b, which precedes the unergative jump, has to have the demonstrative iku as well, or else it will be ungrammatical. This shows that the Javanese AV construction are possibly subject topic constructions and the OV construction and object topic construction. The previous examples of object voice construction are all transitives or two predicate sentences. And I think this is the typical analysis on Javanese OV construction so far. Here I will use three place predicate sentences in which the third participant other than the agent and the theme is available. Unlike the agent or initiator and theme, this third participant can be a prepositional phrase. This will provide new information about the OV construction in Japanese. So in example 8A to 8E, you can see that the pivots or the preverbal elements in orange color here are prepositional phrases. The themes in blue color, on the other hand, stay in situ and can be indefinite marked as shown by the use of WH and AE, which simply means any. So in 8A, the pivot position is filled by an instrument PP ambek paku or with nail, and the in situ theme is the indefinite gambar opoai or any picture. In 8B, the pivot is filled by locative PP nang Jakarta or to Jakarta, and the in situ theme is the indefinite surat opoai or any letter. In 8C, the recent PP mergo alcohol or because of alcohol becomes the pivot, while the in situ theme is the indefinite sopoi or any person. In 8D, it is the beneficiary PP kangukon or for you that serves as the pivot, and the in situ theme is the indefinite lawang diai or any door. In AE, the commutative PP ambek Maria or with Mary takes the pivot position, while the in situ theme is the indefinite omah diai or any house. Since the pivot bears the definiteness constraint, when a prepositional phrase takes the pivot position, it will need to be indefinite as well. So in example 9A, even though there is no definite marker found, nang kebun or in garden has to be interpreted as definite. Therefore, the only possible reading is the garden, not a garden. Similarly, nang omah or in house in 9B has to be interpreted as definite, which is the house and not a house. With the prepositional phrase filling the pivot slot and the theme DP stays in situ, the theme DP no longer needs to be definite marked. In example 10A, the postverbal theme is indefinite as indicated by the word sembarang, which means any. So the flower is indefinite. Sembarang kembang means any flower. In example 10B, the theme DP lading or knife in the postverbal position doesn't refer to any definite or specific knife. The WH and the word AE indicates that the knife can be any knife. When the two phrases appear preverbally, only the pivot slot requires definiteness. So I will first show you that Surabaya Javanese has a hanging topic position before the pivot slot, and the hanging topic position can be filled by a PP or a DP. In example 10A and B, they are active voice constructions. So in example 11A, sorry, in example 11A, the hanging topic is a prepositional phrase, the PP ng kebun or in the garden, which precedes the subject pivot aku or first person pronoun. In example 11B, the hanging topic is a DP, ariku or that boy, that precedes the first person pronoun pivot. The hanging topic is not strictly subject to the definite constraint, but the pivot position has to be definite. In example 11C, the hanging PP topic doesn't have to have a definite marker, and thus can be interpreted as a house. The theme pivot motor or car, on the other hand, has to have a definite marker A, so it has to be montori or the car. Similarly, in example 11D, the theme pivot sukat or grass needs to have a definite marker, so it should be sukate or the grass, while the hanging PP topic ambek karung or with sack doesn't have to, and can be interpreted as with a or some sack. In short, when two phrases occur preferably, the pivot slot must be occupied by a definite phrase. In example 12, the hanging topic is filled by the indefinite DP, sembarang kembang or any flower, and the pivot slot is occupied by the PP, it garden. As shown by the ungrammatical use of WH and the word AE, the PP pivot has to be definite in the garden. A pivot prepositional phrase can also take a post-verbal position either before or after the in situ theme. As shown by example 13A and B, the PP pivot gawi de for him or gawi wong for someone are in post-verbal position. In 13A, the PP follows the theme DP, kembang opwai or any flower, while in 13B, the PP precedes the theme DP. Regardless of its exact post-verbal position, the PP needs to be definite. So gawi wong or for someone is ungrammatical here. On the other hand, the theme DP, kembang opwai or any flower, either preceding or following the PP pivot, can be indefinite marked as indicated by the WS and the word AE, which means any. So from the discussion, there are 3 points we can learn about Javanese object voice. First, only the pivot phrase in Javanese object voice construction is subject to definite constraints. Second, the pivot phrase can be either a theme, DP, or a PP. And third, the pivot can be a reflexive bound by the initiator. These 3 features indicate that the pivot in Javanese object voice is more like a topic and not a subject. So I assume that the fronted theme is actually an internal argument that moves outward to the spec CP or topic position and not the subject position. Consequently, we can expect that the spec TP or subject position is available for another argument. Supporting evidence for the A-bar movement of the theme comes from quantifier float. So in 14A, the quantifier kabeh or all, and the DP ariku or the boys are all in post-verbal position, while in 14B, ariku or the boys moves to the topic position, which is the pre-verbal position, and leaves the quantifier stay in post-verbal position. Next, I will discuss the evidence to support the claim that proclitic is not always an ergative external argument in this construction and can be a subject. With data from unaccusatives and constructions with psychological verbs, I will show that the proclitic can be an internal argument. In unaccusatives, the proclitic can be an undergoer. In example 14, the first person proclitic printed in green color is attached to the unaccusative verb tibo or fall, and the verb is followed by a locative prepositional phrase nang jurang or into the ravine. Here it's clear that it's the first person proclitic who's undergoing the effect of the unaccusative verb tibo or fall. In example 15, the locative prepositional phrase nang kamar mandi or in the bathroom takes the sentence initial position. So the first person proclitic is attached to
to the passive verb kepleset or slip. The only interpretation of this sentence is that it is the first person proclitic that slipped in the bathroom. In 16, the first person proclitic is attached to the unaccusative verb semaput or faint. Therefore, the one who fainted is the first person proclitic. The proclitic can be in first person or second person. In 17, tak tibo ay toko genteng, meaning I will fall from the roof, the first person proclitic tak is attached to the unaccusative verb tibo or fall. In 18, bo tibo nang jurang mau, which means you should have fallen into the ravine, the second person proclitic bo is attached to the unaccusative verb fall. So the ability of proclitics to take unaccusative verbs indicates that the proclitic cannot always be analyzed as an external argument licensed with ergative case, as ergative case is supposed to be unavailable in unaccusative clauses and cannot be assigned to internal arguments. Other Goy-like experiencers can also be licensed as a proclitic. This reinforces the current claim that the proclitic can't be an ergative agent. In example 19, lindu sing tak kuatir no, meaning the thing that worried me is earthquake. The first person proclitic tak is attached to the psi verb kuatir or worry. Therefore, the one who worries about the earthquake is the first person proclitic tak. In 20, udan sing tak mangkel no, which means the thing that irritates me is the rain. The first person proclitic is attached to the psi verb mangkel or irritate. And in 21, macan sing tak wedeni tutu ulo, meaning the thing that frightens me is the tiger, not the snake. The first person proclitic is attached to the psi verb wedi or afraid. Furthermore, the stimulus of the event can be modified by an agent-oriented adverb. This confirms that the proclitic is indeed an undergoer rather than an initiator agent. In 22 and 23, the agent-oriented adverb manang-manang or secretly modifies the WH agents sopo or who, while the second person proclitics take the psychological verbs sedih or sad and worthy or afraid respectively. The proclitic therefore can be an external argument as the first person proclitic with an unergative verb joget or dance in 25, and the first person proclitic and a transitive verb tendang or kick in 26. The proclitic can also be an internal argument as the first person proclitic attached to the unaccusative verb tipo or fall in 24, and other examples we have just discussed. Based on the evidence that the proclitic is able to take unaccusative verbs and psi verbs, and hence can be an internal argument, I conclude that the proclitic is a subject, not only an ergative agent. So going back to the two competing hypotheses, I conclude that hypothesis B, which analyzes the pivot as a topic and the proclitic as a subject, to be more favorable than hypothesis A, which traditionally sees the pivot as a subject and proclitic as an ergative agent. Now let's go back to example 8, which demonstrates the ability of pivot to take various PPs. The pivot position in 8A is filled by an instrument PP with nail. In 8B, it is filled by a locative PP to Jakarta. In 8C, the recent PP because of alcohol is the pivot. In 8D, it is the beneficiary PP for you that serves as the pivot. And in 8E, the commutative PP with Maria takes the pivot position. These examples imply that the Javanese object voice construction might preserve the Philippine type syntax since the pivot can be filled by various types of PPs. So in Tagalog, the pivot can also be such phrases such as theme, instrument, location, beneficiary, reason, or purpose. The voice alternation correlates with the change of the pivot marker position. The pivot marker C indicates an agent pivot as C fret in A, location or source pivot as C1 in B, and benefactor or instrument pivot as Syrian in C. The pivot marker ang tells us that the patient candy in B is the pivot. In conclusion, the two basic constructions in Surabaya Javanese are best analyzed as subject-topic construction and object-topic construction respectively. 1A is an example of subject-topic construction in which the subject city also serves as the pivot and hence occupies the topic position. 1B is an example of object voice construction in which the theme are equal that child is the pivot and hence fills the topic position and not the subject position. Further, the first or second person proclitic in object voice construction should be analyzed as a subject clitic. So in actor voice, the theme stays in situ and gets its accusative case from little v, while the external argument moves to spec TP to get its nominative case and subsequently moves to spec CP. In object voice, the element that moves to spec CP is not the subject, but can be internal argument or a PP argument. Meanwhile, the initiator or underscore proclitic will occupy the subject position. Since the pivot in AV is the subject DP, prepositional phrase can occupy the hanging topic position, but it may not occupy the pivot position as shown by 28, in which the PP ng oma or in the house is between the first pronoun subject and the active voice verb mocho or read, indicating that the PP is in the pivot position. On the other hand, since the pivot in OV is a topic and not a subject, the pivot can be a PP. So in 29, the PP ng oma can precede the verb mocho and follow the theme DP bukwe or the book. The second asymmetry between AV and OV is informed by quantifier float. A quantifier float is possible in pre-auxiliary or pre-aspect position in active voice construction, indicating a movement from spec TP to spec CP. In 30, the quantifier kabeh or all precedes the perfect aspect with and follows the DP wangwedo iku or the women. The pivot in OV can't have a quantified float in the pre-auxiliary or pre-aspect position because the pivot never stops in subject position. This is demonstrated by the ungrammatical example 31, where the quantifier kabeh follows the pivot theme DP, the woman, but precedes the perfect aspect. To wrap up my paper, there are two key implications to take. First, Javanese OV constructions are not ergative aligned. Second, Javanese OV constructions might be structurally different from those in Achanese and Indonesian, which have been argued to possess a theme subject with ergative proclitic. Thank you, and here are the references.
Okay, thank you, Hero. Great talk. We have about 8 minutes for questions. So I see Edith has her hand raised, so we can start there. Oh, and I somehow raised my own hand. Ignore that. Go ahead, Edith.
Oh, so thanks for this really interesting talk. It was very clear and I think very convincing that you have that the clause initial element is a topic in these object voice constructions. But now I have a kind of a theoretical question or maybe even a suggestion for you, and that is, it seems to me that the question of whether this constituent is a subject or a topic becomes moot in a C to T inheritance approach in which inheritance just doesn't take place. And then you don't get the split between the CP and TP positions. And this, of course, has been argued, and not just by me. This, you know, when we saw a paper on Malagasy earlier for this kind of analysis for Austronesian languages. So that's one thing to consider. Then the one counter example that I would think of that you presented also very clearly today comes from the clitic that is not an external argument, but is an internal argument. And so there has to be a position, some kind of a derived position for it. I think that that's clear, and I'm not objecting to that right now. But let me ask you this. Is this argument, whether it's an external argument or an internal argument, can it ever be phrasal, or is it always a pronoun or a personal name or I mean, a personal name also behaves like a clitic pronoun to a certain extent in these languages. So that wouldn't be a good argument. But can it be phrasal? And if it's not phrasal, then I would simply suggest that its position could still be analyzed as being internal to the lower phase, in which case you then still don't need the two.
Edith, I think your audio cut out right when you.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, now I hear you. You were saying you don't need, and after that is where we didn't hear.
Oh, at the very end. Oh, you do. Yeah, you just, yeah. Well, I'm saying that, that if the clitic is not a phrasal element, then you don't need the two specifier positions outside of the lower phase. So then my question is, do you really need these two positions, or can you adopt the more standard analysis that doesn't divide CP and TP in these Austronesian languages? And I'd say the simpler analysis. And the only counterexample I can think of would be this internal argument subject clitic. But if it's only a clitic, then it could still be analyzed as little VP internal. So it's one question, but a complex question.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the argument, the initiator or the internal argument can only take the proclitic forms. So I don't think Surabaya Javanese will allow other than the two proclitics to be the argument, the external argument. And why I will have to split the CP and TP, I guess, from the presentation, I've shown you that because the pivot in object voice has to be definite, and then the fronted theme will occupy the pivot slot. So I guess we still have to argue that the subject position is vacant, and this proclitic has the possibility or has the potential to fill the slot. But I will remain agnostic about the specific position of this proclitic in terms of the spec TP occupation. Well, I personally also guess that this proclitic might be a verb agreement, but that's going to be my step effort in this analysis of object voice construction. So I hope that will answer your question and comment.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for your answer.
Okay, so we have less than 3 minutes left. Hiroki and Daniel, I'm going to ask you both to share those couple of minutes. So Hiroki, you go first.
Okay, my question is related to Edith. I'm also wondering about the proclitics. So you're saying that these proclitics are in spec rather than in spec little VP, but in the subject position spec TP. Then we would expect that the auxiliary comes between the subject proclitic and the verb stem. Does that actually happen? And I won't be surprised if that happens. And it's actually very nice to show that this language has bare active construction. But if this is what other people call object voice, you wouldn't expect auxiliaries after the proclitic. So what's the empirical fact here?
Okay, that's a great question, and I guess that's my main problem with this analysis for now, because the fact is that the proclitic will never like sort of has the overt movement to the spec TP. So like I said, I will remain agnostic about these exact position of the proclitic
in terms of the spec TP position. But just an open perspective, I will argue for now that the spec little VP or the external argument in terms of this proclitic maybe has the ability to interact with this spec TP, because this proclitic from my presentation, I have shown that this proclitic can be the internal argument. So somehow there is some movement of this proclitic to be able to take the unaccusatives and the psi verbs. So yeah, that will be my answer. But yeah, it will be nice to see if the auxiliary or the aspect can appear after the proclitic. But that won't happen in Surabaya Japanese. Thank you, Hiroki.
Okay, we're technically out of time, but Daniel Kaufman, if you have something very quick to contribute, otherwise maybe type it in the chat. Sorry. You're muted, I believe, right now. Shoot.
Oh, sorry. Do I have time to ask, or should I just?
It's really like a social question. I'm not good at those, so I don't know.
All right, I'll just ask and he can answer later. But my question was just, I maybe missed, why don't you get a subject agreement with unergatives? And also I wasn't clear if the PP is a true pivot, it should be able to do everything a pivot can do. So you should be able to get, I don't know, the equivalent of something like dengan apa yang kau beli buku. But that's not possible in Javanese, is it?
No, that's not gonna happen. No, that will not work.
But it doesn't really behave like a normal pivot in that sense, for relativization and questioning and things like that.
Okay, now I'm going to step in and say that's really and I
Sorry.
continue that conversation offline, either on the Slack channel, preferably on the Slack channel, or direct.
Okay.
So thank you, Hero. That was an excellent talk.
Thank you, Chris.
Attending the session. Turning it back over to the organizers now.